All right, here's a quick update on something I'm experimenting with that might clarify some things for some people. So I'm in Tune ECU. I'll go ahead and open up my October 19th map. So this already has, you won't see any fuel trims in here. I've already got them applied here, but basically I added 15% in this area, then tapered it to 12 to 10 to 7. And it's going on the dyno. This was just to richen things up so I didn't have to worry about anything being lean to the point of, doing any damage or getting any detonation or running too hot. It may not be optimal. It feels really good. I don't feel anything weird, but we're going to get it on the dyno. But here's something that I noticed. It idles a little low when I disabled the O2 sensors, and someone asked a question on my channel and it got me thinking. So over here, you can turn on your sensors, and when the bike is running, if this were connected to the bike, I remember that even with my adding 15% down here at idle, I was still seeing trim values where the ECU was reading the O2 sensors and the short-term fuel trims were adding anywhere between 6 and 12, 13, 14%. But if you average it out, 10%, right, in these areas. And it got me thinking, and then that when someone else asked the question, I was like, you know what? There is something I could probably do to address that. Because when I remove the O2 sensors, it's not adding those fuel trims anymore because there's no O2 sensors. It doesn't know what's going on. It doesn't know if it's too lean or too rich. And there, even though this thing is, for Euro 5 compliance, the fact that it was adding fuel says that it's pretty lean there. So when you add to your fuel trims, that helps in most areas because it's drawing from there. When you're sitting there at idle, it's not. It's drawing from the L tables. So this isn't going, so before we're going by throttle position and RPM. The L tables, and this one up here, this is like what your normal power commander, if you're used to using something like that, that's what that uses. However, there is another fuel table that the system switches to at very low throttle openings and at idle called the L tables. In a sub-throttle position, that's based on air pressure from the map sensors, and then RPM. So it's a different scale. So what I was noticing, and I'm going to double check this, is when this thing's just idling, I can see that vacuum pressure for each cylinder. And when it's fast idling, it's typically around 620, 630, 640. Once it warms up, it's closer to 660, 670 for each cylinder. So if I'm understanding that correctly, when I go back to these L tables, this range right in here, so in the idle area, 1400 RPMs, which is where your fast idle is, between 620, 660, and 690, this is the range that the bike is idling at when it's cold and then when it warms up. And then to a lesser extent right here. So what I did was I increased the fueling on the L tables in the idle range for L1 and L2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my map from the other day, which is identical in every way. Fuel tables, no differences. Fuel table 1, open instead of compared. Let's go back. Let's open the new map and then compare it to DISA 1. You notice fuel tables, no differences. Fuel tables, no difference. Here, I've got those dots. If I click and hold, you can see what the old values were. So what I did was, because I remember the short-term fuel trims being anywhere from 6 up to 12, 13, sometimes 14. So I just added 10. Figuring that's a good average. It's going to richen up the idle when it's drawing off the L tables. So in these boxes right here, up to 14%, we've added 10% fuel right here. And then we just tapered it off to 5%. And then it's back to whatever it was. So I'm going to test that. I'm going to play with that because I did notice it was idling a little lumpy when I took off the O2 sensors. I mean, it runs okay, but it did stall for the first time in 2,900 miles, and it was after I removed the O2 sensors, and it stalled at idle. I noticed it was idling a little bit more rough than I remember it before the O2 sensors came out, and then it stalled. Fired right back up, ran fine the rest of the day, but I think, adding fuel up in the fuel tables is great, but that doesn't address idle. And so I've gone ahead and just fattened those up a little bit. You'll notice this is opposite. It's like As you give it more throttle, the vacuum pressure goes the other direction. Before, you're used to thinking of, RPMs climbing and then left to right is giving it more throttle. This is vacuum pressure though. So the more the plates are closed, meaning you're not giving it throttle, the more vacuum, the more suction's being generated. As you open the throttle plates, there's less vacuum, and so it goes this way. So there's two ways to tune the bike. You tune on the F tables, which covers most bases, but it doesn't really address the down here. It doesn't really address the idle. So I've added 10% and then 5%. Here's the new values on this map if you want to do the same to yours. I'll post a link to it. There's the old values. Not a massive increase, but just a little more fueling, and I'm going to see if that makes it idle just that little bit smoother. And if it's good enough, great. The rest of the tuning that we're going to be doing is going to be on the dyno, and it's going to be cell by cell. The way my tuner does it, he doesn't do sweeps. He's going to tell the dyno, okay, I'm giving it 10% throttle at this RPM, and it's going to hold it there for 5 seconds. The engine brake on the dyno is going to physically hold the bike there, and he's going to take 5-second gas reading to get a really accurate reading and see exactly where that AFR is, rather than, when you do a sweep, it's only at any particular RPM increment for like a split second. So this takes longer, but the way this tunes is going to be very methodic, very specific to each RPM and throttle position. And it's going to hold it there for 5 seconds and get a good reading. And then when it's green, it says, all right, we got a good reading. Then it moves on to the next. It's tedious, but it's a good way to tune it. So we'll come back with that, and we're going to have a full map done. But I did want to give that update. I haven't really played with the L tables before, but then in reading up on it and realizing what was going on here, I've had no other issues with my bike running, other than I just noticed it running a little bit lumpy down low with that O2 sensor. And when I pieced together what was going on here before, when I was watching those sensors, seeing that it was adding fuel, I was like, you know what? If it's lean enough there that the ECU, which is designed for compliance, is trying to add fuel, and it did that after I added 15 or 20% or whatever I did over on the F tables, and it didn't make a change here, it's like, oh, that's right. That's because it's coming from the L tables. So watch your bike where it idles. If it's idling lumpy, watch the range where it's idling, and you'll see whatever that value is, 640, 650, use that as your starting point. Don't just limit it to that cell. Move around it a little bit just to kind of cover a range. But you'll notice that this is going to be hovering, once it's warmed up, in the 650 to 670, 680 range. Somewhere in there, you should be right in there. When you sync the throttle bodies, that's what you're targeting. So find that area, as well as where it is when it's fast idling, when it's warming the bike up. And then come over to your L tables, and you'll just do the same thing like you would anywhere else. Hit modify, grab a value. Don't grab that one because that's not in the range, but you grab it, highlight it, and then you drag up and down to make your changes. I just pulled out a calculator and took these values and just figured out, okay, what was 10% more in this whole range? And I just grabbed the topmost one, and it came up to 47.25. So I just grabbed that whole range and slid them all up until that hit 47.25. That told me that this whole range was getting 10% more. Whatever was there before, now it has 10%. Then I grabbed this area, highlighted these 6 cells right here, figured out the math, used this one as my base number. 4480 was a 5% increase, so I dragged them all up until that hit 4480, which means they all got a 5% bump. And then I left it, and that was it. Save the map, going to push it, going to test it later, see how it idles, and I will report back. But there's your little lesson today on L tables.